In this section, I'm going to talk about the primary job of most analysts at the agency, except for the targeting analysts I just mentioned in the last lecture, and that's producing finished intelligence. Finished intelligence is any piece of formal analysis that is disseminated to an external customer. These reports can take many forms. Perhaps the most publicized and certainly the most important such product is analysis written for the President's Daily Brief, or PDB, which is delivered under the auspices of the Director of National Intelligence to the President and their most senior circle each morning. There's a very high threshold to get work in the PDB, and some analysts might rarely write for the publication, if ever, in their career. Others working hot accounts during a crisis might find themselves writing for the PDB several times a week. DA analysts much more frequently write finished intelligence for the CIA World Intelligence Review, also known as the Wire. This electronic product serves senior policy and security officials throughout the government as well as at major U.S. military commands. The threshold for the Wire is much lower than for the PDB, and it's therefore a much more common outlet for analyst work. The PDB, Wire, and a range of other products are all known as current intelligence, meaning they address something that is currently happening that's of interest to U.S. policymakers. Most current intelligence is at most 2 pages long. Now, analysts are also expected to do longer-term analysis, which tends to dig deeper into developing issues or trends, can involve much more in-depth research, and is then published as a longer research paper that tends to go to working-level customers in various departments and agencies rather than to the senior-most customers. These longer products help analysts build deep expertise in their accounts and are also considered critical to demonstrating the skills required for promotion. Analysts on the busiest accounts are often hard-pressed to find the time to do these papers, while those on slower accounts face the challenge of finding topics that meet the threshold of interest required for the PDB or even the Wire, but they have plenty of time to produce longer papers. Regardless of the product type, every piece of finished intelligence an analyst write must answer some key questions. And some of these are pretty obvious, such as the basic who, what, where, when, and how that's required anytime you're writing to explain something to a reader. Those are the easy questions, however, and any report that ends there would be just that. A report of something that happened. It wouldn't be offering useful analysis or insights to the customer. Analysts get paid to analyze, so they must answer the tougher questions. The first of which is usually why. Providing the intent behind an action is very difficult, particularly because you rarely have information that clearly lays out a foreign actor's motives. After why comes the equally challenging so what? Why does this issue matter? And not just in general, but why does it matter to the customers of this piece of finished intelligence? If you take my free Proficiency 1 course, 10 Tips for Improving Your Analytic Writing, you'll see I talk a lot about how critical it is to include a clear so what in any analytic product. If your piece does not have a so what, the odds are that nobody will want to waste their time reading it, so why write it? Part of getting the so what right for a customer is knowing what they care about. So analysts must have a good sense of the interests and even schedules of their most important customers. And this is an idea that we're going to come back to in every Proficiency 1 course that talks about writing. The last question analysts are expected to tackle is far and away the hardest. What's next? To truly help customers make decisions, finished intelligence must address things that haven't happened yet to give policymakers a chance of effecting change in the world. This fact frequently pushes analysts into the difficult role of forecasting. The hardest analytic challenge of my career, and all of the intelligence failures I was involved in, all revolved around how difficult it is to correctly forecast anything complicated. I always would have preferred to just skip the what's next question in my products, as such analysis so rarely stands the scrutiny of hindsight. But being an agency analyst means you must give it your best shot regardless of how uncomfortable it is. To produce a piece of finished intelligence that attempts to answer these questions, every analyst has to go through a 6-stage process. Some of these steps are analogous to what a college or grad student writing a paper would deal with, while others are unique to how the agency does things. The first step is research. When writing current intelligence, where you're analyzing a fast-breaking event, research might entail nothing more than making sure that you have all the relevant information from the last 24 hours. In other cases, particularly with long papers, you might have to review years of material. This process is similar to what you would do for a paper in school, but with 2 very important distinctions. First, as an agency analyst, I have access to a large body of classified information, from satellite imagery to intercepted communications to diplomatic cables and reporting from foreign agents. Such reporting can provide insights that are not available in the unclassified world. Although for many subjects, that gap between what's available to the agency compared to what's in the unclassified world has shrunk since I started in the early 90s with the advent of commercial satellites, private intelligence collection companies, and the internet. Second big difference between working at the agency and being on the outside is that as an agency analyst, my role in the research process isn't limited to a passive one of a student looking up what's available. I'm expected to help steer the classified collection enterprise towards the information I need to answer my customers' questions. I'll talk more about that in a moment. The second step of the process is to write. All agency analysts are taught to produce short, sharp products with a clear what and so what in the initial topic sentence. We tend to favor 2 to 3 sentence paragraphs followed by a series of bullets that contain the reporting supporting our analysis. For more on this writing style, check out my free 10 tips course I mentioned earlier, plus some other Proficiency 1 writing courses we'll have coming out. As someone whose last written product before becoming an analyst was a 400-page PhD dissertation, it took a lot of time and effort to adapt to this alien style, which most closely resembles how journalists are trained to write. The third step in the process is where things get really different than from the outside world, because as an agency analyst, you must coordinate everything you write. This means you must not only share your draft with other analysts who directly or indirectly follow the same issues, you need to ensure that your final draft contains language agreeable to everyone. For example, if you're a political analyst writing a piece about North Korean relations with China, you'll have to coordinate your draft with not only the other North Korean political analysts, but also with any North Korea economists and military analysts who cover relations with China. Then, you also have to coordinate with any agency analysts who follow the China side of the equation. And if you're writing for the PDB, then things get really fun, as you must coordinate with similar analysts at agencies across the intelligence community. On fast-breaking stories, you might have only a day or even a few hours to finish the entire coordination process. My analysts following one particularly hot and high-profile account often didn't receive the information they needed to write their current intelligence until after 5 p.m., and they still had to write and coordinate a product for delivery to the president's desk early the next morning. Needless to say, that type of situation leads to late hours for everyone. Once you have language that all players pretty much agree on, then you hand your product into your first-line supervisor for review. This can take anywhere from an hour for urgent current intelligence to unfortunately weeks or months if you're writing a long paper and have a less than conscientious boss. You might also have to go through multiple layers of management, and if you're writing for The Wire, they have their own staff editors. Things get really serious if you're writing for the PDB. The last time I was involved in that process, I think there were 7 layers of editing between the analyst and the president. I'll talk more about that later too. Once a product is done, the agency will disseminate it electronically or in hard copy, depending on the product. In some cases, the product will be hand-delivered by analysts serving on rotation as designated briefers to specific senior customers across the government. The final step in the process only happens sometimes, and that's when a customer has a question about a piece of finished intelligence, which in turn generates a tasking that the relevant analyst must respond to, often by the next day, and then the process starts all over again. This process probably sounds exhausting, and it can be, but the truth is that for most analysts, having a day where they're producing finished production is the exception, not the rule. So what do they do the rest of the time? I'll talk about that next.